So we have two more speakers now before we pause for another break. First speaker is Rod Bunn, who's a senior analyst at BSRIA, but also, very importantly, an NGD researcher here at UCL IEDE. So I'll hand you over to...
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, like others, I've got quite a number of slides which I'm going to whip through, but hopefully I should be able to do it in the time. I don't like lecterns. Normally I like to be talking to you personally, but unfortunately I've got to hide behind this technology because the zapper doesn't work. More unmanageable complexity. So I'm going to take what other speakers have already said and pose the question of whether we can understand the shortcomings, particularly of energy submetering and all points north. But the question is, can we actually solve this problem? Do we actually have the wit and the will to act on it? That's me, that's what I do, and that's some of the buildings I've done it to, in one way or another. And I manage the Soft Landings Initiative out of BSRIA. So, stop press. Journalists have discovered there's a thing called the performance gap. I don't know where they've been in the last 20 years because it's nothing new to those of us that have been following building performance since the days of the Probe project back in the 90s. And when we did the Probe project, those are the basic headlines of the things that we found. And Kevin will remember this because there was a low carbon buildings performance program. And guess what? It found very similar things, only getting slightly worse. And now we have just completed the £8 million Innovate UK program that others have mentioned, and for which I was one of the evaluators overseeing some of the projects. And if you haven't got the URL already, just go to Building Data Exchange and you can download tons of stuff. So, 8 million quid. That's a lot of money to spend on building performance. What did it tell us that we already knew? Well, everything that's already been said by a number of the speakers. Advanced technologies delivering rather less. Compressed commissioning, even if it does happen anyway, is the norm. If you pile renewables into the building and dump it on a dysfunctional building, then don't be surprised if they don't deliver. We've talked about dysfunctional energy submetering. I would say that almost entirely useless, and I totally agree with Kevin. The first thing we have to do is reconcile them with the main meters before you can do anything else. And the act of doing that will spot all sorts of nasties. Integrating technologies, particularly where they have their own bespoke software, which is more and more. Every subcontractor can bring their own software control system to bear, usually way down the construction chain where it doesn't get enough witnessing by the original designers when it goes in. And we'll come back and I'll give you an example of that in a minute. Now, I'm not going to read all that out. We know that stuff. Befuddled end users and caretakers. And to quote Bill Bordaskers, why not? Everybody else has done so this afternoon. Unmanageable complexity is the enemy of good performance. We're not learning this, though. I mean, we kind of, I could say this in a conference in a year's time, but we're somehow not understanding what it means, and we're not acting on it. We're just piling in the complexity. So what did £8 million tell us that we didn't know? I really struggled to fill this slide in. I gave myself a heading and then sat and stared at the screen for a while because there was very little that we didn't know. From work that's been done on the BPE program, we discovered that BREEAM Outstanding delivered reasonably low energy, but excellent ones used more than very good ones. So something's going wrong there. You might say that pole control of space heating and so on is nothing new, but at least the BPE program confirmed it. Tick box approach to Part L compliance is rife. I think Part L, I would happily stand up here publicly say that I think Part L has reached the end of its days and we need to rethink it. And as Kevin was alluding to earlier with biomass, we're putting in renewables when we're funded to do so, but these things often get turned off. Good news, passive house certification seemed to focus more attention to the detail. That's great, and the setting up a balancing of things, particularly for the domestic dwellings that had MVHR. Bad news is that domestic housing, as far as the BPE program is concerned, is now inheriting all the unmanageable complexity that we've been seeing in non-domestic buildings. That's not a good way to go forward. We need to get out of that before we get deeper into it. So let me give you an example. This is the Jarman building at the University of Canterbury, which I was responsible for overseeing. And hopefully this will make sense to you. We've got a performance area. We've got the underside of a passive stack ventilator, and there we have a passive stack ventilator. What could possibly go wrong with that? Well, I'm not going to read all this out. You can read it as quickly as I can, but essentially the specification had specified BEMS operation of the boilers, but the standalone controls, the underfloor heating, were doing their own thing. So not so much of a problem, if only for the fact that it's supposed to integrate with the wind-assisted ventilation, which the BMS couldn't control, it could only oversee, and despite the fact they put in a new controller, they're still not utterly convinced that the BMS is actually controlling everything. The stack-assisted ventilation system seems to be a law unto its own. Now, that wouldn't matter so much, but there are vents in this drama studio that open in order to ventilate it. That rushes across the rushes cold air across the floor, and the underfloor heating can't handle that. But they've got a blackout curtains, and when they're closed, the problem disappears. But it's not really an answer, is it? Let's be honest. But when they did the testing on this space, they discovered that the uncontrolled infiltration through the passive stack louvers amounted to about 1.5 air changes. So, you know, what could possibly go wrong? Well, quite a lot, just on that one. Now, elsewhere in the building, they had other problems, the systems fighting each other. This isn't quite the right space, but I didn't have a photograph of the space. But essentially, because they didn't specify in the specification that the VRV, variable refrigerant volume air conditioning, and the underfloor heating should be interlocked, the fact that they're all individual controls mean that these things run riot, and of course, they conflict with each other. And there's nothing they can do about it, because it's job done. So there we go, but not to worry. It won an award. That's all that matters. I think we need to get out of this as well. I think, you know, each of you needs to go back to your organizations and actually ask your own questions. Do you celebrate your buildings and your websites when they've won an award and then not do the BPE and actually come clean about the energy consumption? I'll leave that one with you. But there were some successes in the BPE program. Here's two of them, two rather splendid buildings. One is the Mayville Community Center and one is Staunton Primary School. And they both managed to get their energy consumption down. Mayville is passive house. Staunton came perilously close to passive house, but isn't passive house, but as near as damn it, performed very much like one. And so this is good news. These are good buildings. The problem here isn't the buildings themselves, around 800 square meters. The problem is it doesn't scale awfully well. Now, this is a table I've kept going for some time. There's an awful lot going on in this table, so please don't try and understand it. But essentially, we've got a number of schools there of varying sizes. And you can see if you go from left to right, you've got the BREEAM, you've got the EPC. The grey area is where they're not supposed to have a display energy certificate, but even when they are supposed to have a display energy certificate, it's not being enforced, and the display energy certificates are being conveniently forgotten. If you look at Pennywell Academy, where's the zapper? We have a zapper, which is the top. There we go. So here we have Pennywell, Petchy, and Stockport Academy, large schools, and look at the display energy certificate compared with the BREEAM and EPC. Now, we know the EPC is not a reflection of DEC. Nonetheless, those are terribly high figures. But worse than that is the lighting energy consumption. Now, remember what I was just saying earlier about things don't scale awfully well. Some of these small schools, you're getting around 10 kilowatt hours a square meter per year. That's pretty good. You can do better than that, but 10's not bad. But look at those large academies. We're up into the 30s. This is not sustainable. It's not appropriate. And we can't repeat that. So we've got a problem with scale. That was what I would argue, that we can do things on a small scale, but as soon as the buildings get too big or get larger, we struggle to keep control of things. BUS surveys that others have mentioned. A couple of things I just add to the debate. Here we had an extension to Bessemer Grange Primary School, and when they did the occupant survey, again, as Kevin experienced on one of his buildings, a row of greens. That's fantastic. But it comes back, I think, to a question of the audience in the last session. When we did the survey on the existing 1950s school next door, guess what? Now, this is interesting, because basically what it's saying is that although a building is only typical in terms of its needs and its design and not necessarily regarded as a particularly healthy place, although it's pretty neutral, the school is performing pretty much as well as the new one. Now, the point to take away here is that old buildings have virtues that we ignore at our peril. And we need to understand what those virtues are when we're designing new. So recently I did another school, which will remain nameless because it's not in the BPE program. The existing school, unsurprisingly, is on the left, and the new wing is on the right, and guess what? So when we looked at this new school, and I can't benchmark these results because I separated them, and therefore I got slightly smaller samples, but you can see that the new wing is falling down on the air and temperature variables, which the old school has no problem with. The old school, in fact, is doing slightly better on a number of variables. So this is a really interesting finding. We think we're solving performance problems with new buildings, but actually old ones can do just as well. Now, there's a whole presentation in those 2 slides, so I'll say no more. So when we talk about building performance evaluation, then I think it begs a question. You know, as technologists and engineers and architects, we're actually much more interested in the technical criteria. But once the building is handed over, it's the contextual stuff that matters most to the building owners. And it's stuff that we actually have grave difficulty in getting a handle on. And this stuff, because it's so important, and arguably more important than the technical criteria that we all understand, we need to find ways of assessing it, and we need to find ways of assessing it reliably, which is why I'm at UCL. Now, if you want, I'm not going to steal Matt's presentation, but you can go to the Building Data Exchange website and you can download all sorts of stuff, all the reports on the projects. If you scroll down, you'll come across a report on the domestic buildings, and you might start with reading the findings from the non-domestic projects. So that's a good place to go. Well, what do I think, having been involved in the £8 million BP program, what do I think the legacy is of all of this? Well, I'm going to be a little bit controversial here, and hopefully we can fuel some debate afterwards. The first bullet point, I think, is pretty obvious. Despite money piled in by the Carbon Trust and Probe in the 1990s and now this £8 million BP program, we're just not getting better buildings. If anything, they're going backwards. We're getting excessive energy consumption and, by consequence, carbon dioxide emissions, and often the renewables are masking fundamental underperformance in the building. EPCs, they're not only not worth the paper they're written on, they're not worth the ink they're written with. And I think we've got to call time on this because it's misleading us. I also think there's so much Part L model fudging going on that also has to be brought into question. And of course, the policing of display energy certificates is hopeless. Good news is that BREEAM Outstanding and Passive House seem to be showing the way to go. When you up the bar, when you raise the bar and you put the certification in place and you put the policing in place, you're more likely to get a better result. You know, discuss. One of the biggest issues I have is that, and it's partly a consequence of design and build, but it's not wholly associated with design and build. We don't have enough understanding amongst the project partners throughout the project as the project progresses to actually understand the component parts of performance and keep them live and keep on top of them. I think there's a lack of skills and tools to visualize and track performance as it emerges. It cannot be a shock after handover. Right? We've got to see things coming much better. We have to be able to model it or present it in a simple and robust way, particularly as it emerges, not after the event. So, where do I think, as an engineering doctorate student at UCL, I thought, well, okay, what's my perspective on this? I was a UCL doctorate student before this presentation. We'll see what happens afterwards. I can say, quite happily stand here and say that I believe that the UCL students with whom I work and are going through various MSc modules are being very well versed in the performance gap and the need to close it. No problem there. I think that's great. And the modules that I know and love are actually focusing on both the quantitative and the qualitative tools. That's great. But, and it's not a big but, it's a little but, these things can't be taught in isolation. There needs to be an overarching framework. And obviously managing the soft landing initiative out of BSRIA, I would say that needs to be the overarching framework. If not soft landings, then something like it. It has to be integrated, not a bolt-on. And as others have said, we desperately need the culture of feedback and aftercare to make BPE routine. And the other thing I think the educational establishments up and down the country would take note of is that the realities of construction, that those practitioners amongst us live and breathe day to day. Time and cost pressures, the forms of contract, project team relationships, miracles of economy, otherwise known as vandal engineering. These things need to be tackled head on. It's too important to let students go out into the outside world and discover it for themselves after the event. We need to be tackling this straight on, which leads me to one of my kind of bottom lines is that postgraduate support in this is vital for follow-through. You know, graduation is the end of the beginning. So, good news, another piece of good news is that the evaluators on the program have decided to stay together and as a group. And one of the things I hope that we will do is offer our advice and our support to those students that need it now the building performance database is available to them for their MScs and PhDs. And I think that would be a really good thing for us to do, and I'm looking forward to working with students on that. So, we clearly have the wit to deal with building underperformance, but do we truly have the will, and what are we going to do as a consequence of today? That's me done. under time as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Rod. And so now just the final presentation in this session, we've got Matt Colmer, who's a built environment specialist from Digital Catapult, who's going to give us the final presentation in this session. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I feel like an introduction to an AA session there because it's my name is Matt Colmer and I am the one responsible for the £8 million programme that told us things we already knew. So, some of you I've probably met, a lot of you I've probably met. I was lead technologist responsible for the building performance evaluation programme for Innovate UK, and I finished with Innovate UK on December the 31st, just gone. And there were fireworks, apparently, to celebrate that. Sorry, that was great. I now work for the Digital Catapult, taking on the next stage of building performance evaluation, which is known as the Building Data Exchange. Who here has heard of the Digital Catapult? That's not bad, actually. That's not bad at all. I was expecting a couple of hands and a bit of murmuring, but that's absolutely fine. That's great. Just a real brief introduction about what the Catapult is. We are one of 9 other catapults. We deal with the digital sector. There are ones across satellite applications, transport, cell and gene therapy, the future cities, NCC, the building that Kev talked about earlier on is actually part of the Catapult network. That's high-value manufacturing. And we're basically here to accelerate economic growth in the UK. That's very similar to what Innovate UK is doing, and we are part of the Innovate UK family. The difference being is that there have been specific areas which have been identified that the UK has leading academic knowledge on, academic and business knowledge on, but we're just failing to grab the IT or the IP ground on there. And the internet is one of them. Tim Berners-Lee, the father of the internet, sourced within the UK, yet it's Silicon Valley that stole the march on that, and we're missing those opportunities. So what the catapults are non-profit, private limited companies, and we are completely neutral. And I'll touch on that neutral bit in a while because it does address the knowledge, the secret knowledge bit that Bob was mentioning earlier on. How are we actually going to access some of this secret knowledge? So for the Digital Catapult, our 4 focus areas are sharing data, pretty much, sharing closed data, personal data, content and license data, and data sharing across the Internet of Things. So this is where we're talking about sharing closed data. This is the secret information. What the Catapult can do is work as a neutral convener, so information that doesn't want to be shared, it could be proprietary, it could be personal, you can bring it to the Catapult, and then we can work around that to get other interested parties involved in that information. A key one that we did relatively recently was a mixture of insurance claims and medical details, where you've got 2 parties who will benefit from sharing information, but they don't want to. We can convene it through the Catapult. Both parties get the information they need, they get the knowledge they need, but the information is secured and not shared. So that's basically what we are hoping to do with the Catapult, and this is what we're looking to do with building performance data. Digital Catapult specifically, we have 4 centres across the UK. We have the North East and Tees Valley, Brighton, Yorkshire, but the main centre's in London, in Euston. Fantastic building, lovely view, encourage you all to come and visit. And we work across the UK, we cross across different sectors, different communities, really to try and bring all those people together. And ultimately, we work together and we never work alone. In terms of the Catapult, we are a resource of knowledge, a resource of specific technical expertise, but we need industry knowledge to come and help support that. We work across sectors. I'm quite unique within the Catapult because I work in the built environment side, but that's purely on the one project, the Building Data Exchange, which is what I'm going to be talking about now. So the Building Data Exchange, BDX, life's too short sometimes, so we always go with BDX now in terms of what we're looking at in terms of the new platform, which is at the moment looking at built environment data from the Building Performance Evaluation Program. So those of you who were here this morning when my colleague Simon was talking, we understood from the outputs of the Building Performance Evaluation Program over a year ago now that the information we were getting was too complex just to put into a series of reports. And exactly like Rod was saying earlier on is the fact that just generating more reports on the subject really isn't going to benefit anybody anymore. We're repeating what a lot of people have done already. We've got findings which people already know. Okay, the context is different, and I think we have progressed. There is more learning there. But we need to be able to start pushing this thing forward. And so just by pushing reports out there, that's not going to be good enough. We need to learn, and we need to share the factors about building performance and what we're doing. Apologies, corporate colors are pink, bit of retina burn. There's only a couple of these ones. So the BPE program shows that in terms of the domestic, the average carbon emissions are 2.6 times higher than the design estimate. And in terms of the non-domestic, it was only one of the 49 non-domestic buildings actually had the emissions that matched the design estimate. Now, these are self-selecting buildings. These are not run-of-the-mill ones. These are the ones that came into the competition and had an expectation of them being higher performing. And so this is a real challenge. And we need to be able to get the learnings from the program out into the wider world and start innovating and getting solutions to those. The lessons to learn are fine, but it's the solutions that are most important. So what the Building Data Exchange aims to do, and at the moment it's just the Building Performance Evaluation Program information in there at the moment. That is seeding it. It's pushing this forward. I will go on to what the vision for the platform is in a couple of minutes. But at the moment, what we're looking to do is unlock the information, allowing people to interrogate it. That's pretty much all the raw data and across the different platforms that we have, which Simon mentioned earlier on, Carbon Buzz, Embed, the BUS database, the TM22 information, the DOMM information, and the final reports, which are incredibly detailed bits of information. Allow people to discover that. So not only looking at it across individual projects, looking at it sector, looking at it by theme, but the key bit that we want to try and do is innovate around that. Take that information, take those figures, take that learning, and really try and engage the different communities out there, specifically around the digital communities, but 100% involving the built environment innovators in order to try and get new solutions, better ideas, and real try and solve and get some of the issues around the performance gap addressed. So that's the engagement piece. This is not something that we're doing on our own. This is a funded program for the next 3 years, and we really need to engage with the various different audiences out there. So it's early days at the moment. If you've been onto the BDX, it is a series of reports from the Building Performance Evaluation Program. It's still a little bit clunky. We still need more work on there to bring across the cross-learnings, and we need more data. As I said, it's specifically at the moment from the Building Performance Evaluation Program. We're looking very shortly to bring data in from the Retrofit for the Future program, which was the Innovate UK analysis of social housing retrofits, and also other information that we have from the other programs we have within the built environment platform within Innovate UK. But we need it to be a growing resource. There's only so much information that we can provide as Innovate UK. So we're really looking for other organizations to bring their data to us. Now, I need to be quite careful here and be quite clear about what we actually want. We don't want to start hosting data. We don't want people to start giving us stuff. We're quite happy to convene people around data, but you need to own and have responsibility for your own information and your own data. What we want to do is be able to use the BDX to start linking data, bringing an open view about how you can navigate around different complex data sets, how we can start getting those data sets to interrelate via online tools, online metrics, bringing them together through APIs and further communication throughout the different data sets that we have. We really want to encourage closed data. Again, it's on the point that Bob made earlier on. One of my key things that I would like to achieve reasonably quickly is being able to liberate defects data from certain unnamed warranty providers. Because if we can start liberating that in a closed data set, which means that the people who own the data are happy and secure that that information is not going to be shared in an uncompetitive way, and then bring other cost data in terms of that, we get a really good idea about the cost of poor performance in new build homes. And that would be a really, really good thing to start pushing. And we can do it at the Catapult. We've done it before. As I said, you can't get much more sensitive than medical information. And we've successfully been able to do that. There's no reason why we can't do it with built environment data. So if there's anybody out there who has any idea of, or owns data sets, and you would be interested in talking about how you can start participating within the building data exchange, that would be a fantastic conversation to start having. And we hopefully start having that today. So we're talking about innovation pit stops as well, and hackathons. We just had a hackathon the other weekend. I'll talk about that in a minute. But the innovation pit stops are really interesting. That's where we will take organizations with a specific challenge, commercial organizations, to say, I have got this issue that I need to resolve. We don't have the in-house resources to do it. You come and hold a pit stop with the digital Catapult, and we will bring some of the brightest minds that we have to really work around that idea and try and get some pretty neat solutions and help you work and identify the people who can start addressing some of those key challenges there. And kind of the reverse of that is a hackathon, which is where we open up data, put a series of challenges together, and just let people run amok through the data and come up with their own pretty cool ideas. And so we had a hack. This is my first hack weekend. We had it from the 6th to the 7th of February, and it was actually really quite an eye-opener. Bearing in mind it was a Saturday morning when it started, so that's an eye-opener. But it's 24 hours, 48 hours of working with some really smart teams. So the way it worked is we put together a series of challenges. We had a series of industry sponsors, Innovate UK, National Energy Foundation, Arup, WikiHouse were involved and really good with there, and the Catapult themselves. So we put together 7 challenges to pretty much guide the teams. They're not set in stone, but they help people to kind of visualize the issues of the day which are involved in organizations are involved in. They then start on the process of hacking the data. So we laid out all the information from the BPE portfolio. We also had the Retrofit for the Future information available. We had information from the Environmental Data Exchange, which is a sister platform to the Building Data Exchange. And the guys came up with some really, really interesting solutions. So here's some pictures of the teams that are involved. This team was called the Bots. The Bots came up with a really interesting scenario, actually. So rather than taking the data itself, they took manifestations of issues from the Building Performance Evaluation Program, which was MVHR and the fact that the people in dwellings feel disconnected from an MVHR system. Justin, you mentioned this earlier on, and what these guys did is they scavenged around the Catapult and actually built a sensor that would monitor indoor air quality, send a signal from a base station on the roof of the Catapult to a Things network, which would then send a push notification saying your indoor air quality is bad. It's linked to the mechanical ventilation system, and it would give you some solutions of what's happened. Your mechanical ventilation system has been off for 3 days. Your indoor air quality is bad. Turn on your MVHR. Your indoor air quality is bad. Your filters need changing. It's a push notification. You don't interact with it, and it's something that will give the individuals within the property an action to operate on. And they did this scavenging around the building for bits and pieces, and it was a working prototype which they demonstrated on the stage on the Sunday afternoon. Another team, which was called Plan C, because Plan A and Plan B unfortunately didn't work. They used performance data from the non-domestic portfolio in order to look at how you can use real information in use to feed back into the design stage, but how you encourage people to actually use that information. So they came up with roadmaps of gamifying big data to encourage people to start using it. Now, when we look at it from a technical point of view, saying, okay, well, if you're gamifying data, then maybe you're introducing the challenges of, bringing poor data or low quality data into the equation. But what we were looking for here is actually the ability to use different thinking and saying actually gamifying stuff. If we're lacking information, if we're lacking wide-scale information on the non-domestic or domestic portfolio, then gamifying it and encouraging people to collect it is actually quite an interesting technique. So this got the prize for the most innovative idea. Team Swarm, these guys came up with a working prototype and actually didn't use building performance evaluation data at all, which is slightly frustrating, but that's okay. They were using information from the Retrofit for the Future program and actually tapped into the NEED database, the National Energy Efficiency Database. So it's pushing out the boundaries of the information that they had to hand. And this was looking at how do you actually increase the quality of information that is feeding not necessarily EPCs, because we didn't like EPCs, but feeding the kind of information that people would look at when they're making a purchase decision or a retrofit decision. And this was using their Swarm platform, which is taking information from various different databases, running it through their engine, giving it to the user, and allowing the user to add to that information to feed back in to the open database. So this database was via APIs in different circumstances, different scenarios, being able to constantly update and constantly grow as a platform to inform the building user. Now the winners were Team Active, and they came up with the Active platform, which was a software as a service application, which basically means that they will sell you a piece of kit, and then they will work with you using that piece of kit over a period of time in order to increase the skills or increase the ability of the facilities management to make the workplace a happier place for employees. Because they were saying that the team's theory was being that a happy workplace is a productive workplace. You say, okay, well, that is absolutely fine, but the key thing here is that BMS systems are fairly impenetrable, and they work with a closed team of facilities management. And the operation of a building is fairly disconnected from those people who use it. And so it puts the power of feedback into the hands of the people who use the building through the Active app. And again, they had a real-time app which was on a smartphone, which was taking in light levels, it was looking at noise levels. You had the ability to feedback saying, it's too noisy, it's too hot, it's too cold, and really enable the teams to be able to feed back to the facilities manager and the facilities management site to be able to optimize their building for the building users. But that's not to say that the building was then also ignored in terms of the performance side, because you still have the Active app for the facilities manager. So they now have the opportunity to optimize their building both on the performance and their user happiness. So that team got the prize for the best commercial application within the hack. But all teams who got involved really looked at these different aspects of the hack challenges in a very, very different way. You had individuals that were looking at technical solutions, bits of kit. You had people who were looking at the application of specific data and adding to that. Or you had the teams who were looking at the existing data and saying, okay, how can we then start to make that data, which is existing, we're not adding to the BP data set anymore, but how can we make that data work harder? So what we're looking for the next series of hacks are industry sponsors. We want people to come up with specific challenges and specific ideas. We want people to put teams together. We want people to come and get involved in the hackathons. We want to get people involved in the digital catapult generally anyway. We really need and we really want the built environment to get involved in this undertaking. It's very different. It's very different for me working as a built environment person now, sitting with people who talk about data and APIs and applications and LoRa base stations on roofs and things networks. It's completely bizarre for me. But it's incredibly interesting how they are interacting with each other and the information that they're coming together. And I think from what we have seen from the first hack, I would never have really anticipated that we would have been able to get this quality of finished product in what was, in essence, probably 24 hours, because we did close. We had pizza, we had beer, then we closed, and we opened again in the morning. It's not like we're slave drivers and get them to run through the night. But really, really, please try and get involved. My details are on there. Again, the full website of the Building Data Exchange is buildingdataexchange.org.uk. bdx.org.uk works just as well. And it is a growing resource. It will be added to. And if you have information, please, please get in touch, because we really want it to be a platform that will grow over the next 3 years to be useful to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt. We have a few minutes to allow some time for questions. So, yeah, if Rod, if you wouldn't mind joining us back in the front here, please. Lots to get your teeth into for some questions there, I think. First question on the right there.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for some very good presentations. There's some themes through a number of these which carry on from earlier, which is to do with Part L, EPCs, process of getting there, and whether in fact we're barking up the wrong tree. I want to share it with you and then get your opinions. There's some work being done by the EDGE looking at restructuring building regulations, initially for new build housing, which basically gets rid of the process and you just need to hit a target. Some of this is, a measured target. And a lot of this is building, certainly I was working in Sydney for some time and worked with neighbours, where you have to, as designers and the construction team, meet a certain energy in use. We've prepared a proposal which is in the circulation of the industry, but the idea is you get rid of most of this process, which is monitoring a process, which is what the building regulations are at the moment, as opposed to what an outcome is and a real performance is. And the aim is that, given today you've got the likes of smart meters in new buildings, which are basically just communication in and out, but the idea of a hive with some add-on which monitors temperatures, occupants set, and the amount of hot water they use, and the outdoor weather, you can start to standardise your performance of your building. And I'm just interested in whether this has mileage for moving beyond new build residential to other sectors. Now we're taking to pieces end use performance, we can begin to look at what are the first order issues we need to monitor in a building, to then the design team and the construction team can decide how they predict those. And very interesting, I'm not going to talk about it now, how it has ended up simplifying the process and making it far more transparent.
Thank you. Do you have any responses?
Yeah, I agree. We need to be focusing on operational energy, not dodgy predictions or predictions which are incomplete for all sorts of reasons. I think if one were to introduce some kind of, I mean, you're talking about domestic, obviously, but it's just looking at it broadly, you know, theory and practice, in theory, theory and practice are the same, but in practice, they're very different. And one of the things that the construction industry broadly will have to do is take custody of building performance. And we're not required to do that. There are some clients out there and there's some professionals out there who do take custody, either because the clients are paying for it or the professionals think it's part of their duty, but it's not actually a requirement of the contractual process.
Bit of the building regulations you would retain
Yeah.
is a need to hit a target.
Is a need to hit a
And there's
target.
liability on
But it means you've got to model it much more accurately, and it means you've got to keep track of all the factors, both technical and operational, that will change that number as you're going through. And it's, you know, it's kind of logical because the current form of legislation or current approach to achieving compliance just isn't working anymore, and we've got to change. We've got to up the bar. It's as simple as that. So yes, I think our compliance mechanism should be on operational energy, and there should be a commitment. But of course, the penalties have to come with that. But I'd rather think we would talk about incentives as much as we talk about penalties.
or an insurance policy.
I'd hope to think it wouldn't be necessary, but yeah.
No, I agree, especially the point about trying to ensure that it doesn't happen through policies and fines. Operational performance is the key metric, and it's not just operation performance as built, it's operation performance, 5, 10 years down the line, especially if we're looking at the security of our building stock up to 2050, which is where the legislation is heading. And I think there are lots of things we can learn from specifically the passive house approach. I'm not advocating passive house as a certification, but we have definitely seen from the BPE program that the process of going through passive house, because you have that iterative approach and the constant on-site looking, because you have that end performance in mind, does work much better than just allowing people on site, do your bits, come back and check it.
I'm just going to say, do you mind if we just...
Yeah, sure.
Well, thanks. Sorry to... Let's just take one more question before the break, if we could, please. Anyone got anything they're bursting to...
Matt, I was just quite excited about the opportunities of the Building Data Exchange, and I just want to throw a couple of things in. There's one a local authority, and I'm just trying to remember the name, some years ago, that managed to persuade the utility companies to download their data into that local authority's database, so that they could see how the buildings in their community were performing. And that was done on a basis that no one, wasn't, the information was anonymous. And I just think there's potentially a tremendous, surely, opportunity for you to do that on a national scale. And then, secondly, on the...
in fact, can we just, I think we're just about running out of time, so can we just take that one first point, and whether...
I agree, and that's the idea of a neutral convener, because that's sharing closed data in a closed way. So it's going from one organisation to another organisation and is not accessible for people to innovate around. What we would like to do is take that information and desensitize it and make it available for people to then innovate around. So that's exactly the kind of solution. So if you know people who are doing that, then absolutely we're interested in that.
I think we're going to have to carry on these conversations during the break, if we could, please. Can I just thank both Rod and Matt for their fascinating presentations.